Good evening. All right, everybody, welcome along. Thanks ever so much for joining again. Hopefully you can see and hear me. I think I've got this licked now. Hopefully I am plugged in, aren't I? Yeah, we're all good. Excellent. Right, welcome back to another week, another show. I really look forward to these, and I now know that so many of you do. So thank you for all the really kind and nice messages that you've all sent saying this is really now part of your F1 weekend, and I'm really pleased about that. I want it to be part of your weekend because this is about you, and it's led by you, it's driven by you, it's shaped by you, and I'm just here to filter through the questions and kind of facilitate it. So thank you for all of your input. I really appreciate it. Hello to you all from all over the world. I'm not going to run through everybody again because although I enjoy doing that every week, it seems a bit repetitive. We've got loads to talk about. There are so many questions that have come in this week, all around Mugello, obviously, and you know, so many talking points came out of that weekend, didn't it? Amazing circuit, beautiful circuit. I've been there before running an F1 car. It's a brilliant, brilliant place to operate an F1 car from a driving perspective. It's amazing. But what do we think of the race? And I'm going to quickly start this show off by going into the poll that I put up on the community tab earlier on, because I think that's a really quite a nice indicator of what most of you think of that particular event. My question on the poll was this: should we have Mugello as a regular feature on the F1 circuit? Not just a one-off for 2020, but does it deserve, and is it good enough to have a regular place on the calendar? That was the question. Would you like to see Mugello become a regular F1 race venue? This is your response. 75% of you saying yes, it absolutely needs to be a regular place, have a regular place because it's an old school track, and that's exactly what we want more of. 16% saying no, because without race control's intervention, perhaps the race would have been boring. Maybe it wouldn't have been as exciting if we hadn't had the safety cars, the red flags, the crashes, and all of the chaos that we'll get into in a moment. And 10% of you not really sure. So there we go, 75%, an overwhelming number, would love to have Formula One regularly visiting Mugello. So let's open it up with that kind of question then. What do you think? Why should it be on the calendar? Or if you think it shouldn't, why shouldn't it be? I'll just give you quickly my views on this. I think it's an amazing place. I do think actually we could end up, or we could go there. I think it could justify a place on the calendar. The reason I say that is partly, as I said in that poll, it's old school. And the fact that it's old school, for me, leads to some of the incidents that we had at the weekend. People going off into the gravel, having crashes. It's a narrow circuit. You know, the drivers then have to lean on another set of skills that they might not have to lean on at some other circuits, at a Tilke circuit where it's wide, they've got endless runoff, they can push beyond the limits and not fear any penalty as a result of that. At Mugello, you can't do that. So you lean on a new set of skills or a different set of skills. And I like that. I think we should mix it up across the race weekend. Now, I want to see what you're saying on this. So let me bring in your comments. Here we go. Lots of you saying, let me just refresh that. Lots of you saying that, yes, it was great to see gravel traps right next to the circuit. Yes, it was great that drivers were punished for making mistakes. Bring back gravel on track, says Rakatata 4. Which track should it replace, says Clansome. That's a good point. But actually, it's not necessarily the only factor here, because Liberty are very, very keen to extend the schedule to 25 races if we ever get back to any kind of normality. This year's a very different year, but they want to increase the numbers of races. And obviously, it all depends whether someone's willing to pay for it. But, you know, that's an old school circuit that I think makes a really refreshing change to almost all of the new circuits that have been added to the calendar over recent years. Flying Tiger says yes, because gravel traps. I think the landscape and the particular topography of the track really added something, Jamie Eames. Young drivers looked a bit out of their depth in some places, says Chris. Well, maybe they did, and we'll get into that in a moment, but is that not a good thing? Should experience not really count for something? Should it punish the drivers that maybe don't have experience? Or maybe should it highlight the fact that some drivers are a little bit short on skill or understanding or knowledge at some of these old school circuits? For me, yes, it should. Now, answer B in that poll was no, it shouldn't be on the calendar, because without race control's intervention, it might have been a boring, dull race. And that's a fair point. And I actually think the answer to that is it probably would have been. However, the fact that it's an old school circuit meant we had a number of those incidents, and race control therefore had to intervene. We'll talk about how they intervened, why they intervened, when they intervened. We'll get into all of that in a moment because there's loads of questions obviously around all of that. But as a circuit, I think it has enough value to add something to the F1 calendar. That's my thoughts on this. F2 and F3 races showed that the track isn't boring. The DRS-dependent cars just don't work. Varun Sambi, that's another good point. We've got new cars coming to Formula One in 2022. One of the negatives about that Mugello circuit, of course, was there was only really one overtaking point, which was at the end of that long straight under DRS or around the outside of turn 1 at the end of that DRS zone. One opportunity, but that's still more than some circuits have that we go to. And actually, one of the reasons we didn't have more opportunities was partly because the current crop of Formula One cars struggle to follow each other so much, particularly through the high-speed corners that we have at that particular circuit. From 2022, of course, the cars are being redesigned to try and overcome at least some of that problem, to allow cars to follow each other more closely, and therefore they may open up more overtaking opportunities on a circuit like that one. So I think let's not write it off like that. I think there's enough, as I say, enough value that we can add something to the calendar. I've just seen somebody say there about adding more. There we go. Cody Piscitelli. We need more banked corners. I absolutely agree with you. Those banked corners, like turn 1, really show that there's more than one line that you can take around those corners. Zandvoort, of course, has those in a much more extreme fashion. Really looking forward to going to that circuit as well. Old school gravel traps. No massive runoff areas. So I really like all of that. And I know that loads of you do. The poll there, I guess, tells a story in itself that 75% of you would love to see it back on the calendar. So that's Mugello for me. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I always enjoyed going there when I've been in the past. And I do think that it can add something special. So particularly as the cars develop through the 2022 regulations. So there we go. Really looking forward to that. Now, let's get into all of the other talking points around Mugello. You're already talking about it in the chat, I can see. Loads of questions. I'm going to start with this one. Hold on a sec, where is it? I'm going to start with this question here from... in fact, we're going to start by talking about what Michael Massey said. So let's talk about the incident quickly. So the incident... Mainly, let's talk about the start line incident off the back of the safety car, first of all, and then we'll get into all the other stuff. So, very dangerous incident. No one likes to see crashes like that happening because, whilst luckily everybody got away with it, it could have very easily been a different story, and we could have been having a very different chat today, and the internet could have been awash with some very, very sad stories, sad images, and it could have, could have been completely different. And it wasn't far away from that. This was a kind of situation that could have gone either way. Now, the incident itself was triggered by a number of factors, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But what I want to first start with is Michael Massey, the race director's response to all of those criticisms that you've probably heard the drivers talking about, and criticisms around the circuit as well. So let's see, I can see you're already, lots of you saying the safety car light should have been turned off earlier. What else have we got? I love MotoGP races at Mugello, absolutely. Race ban for Russell, safety car should have been turned off earlier. The incident was a product of a strong headwind, right? Was the incident Russell's fault? Right, let's get into all of that, because most of the drivers, or at least some of the drivers that I've heard, have openly come out and effectively blamed race control for either turning the safety car lights out too late or for the position of the control line, which is the finish line. We'll get into that in a moment. Michael Massey, though, the race director, has responded to all of that, and that's the one that I would like to start with. So, Paul says, what's your take on Michael Massey's comments that there's no need to review safety car restart procedures? It's all well blaming the drivers, but this could easily happen again as they'll always try to gain an advantage. Can you think of a suitable solution? Right, well, I'll leave the second part for a moment, the suitable solution. Michael Massey essentially saying, off the back of the drivers' comments, hang on a minute, This is not down to the fact that the safety car lights went out too late. It's not even just down to the fact that the position of the control line is so far along the start-finish straight. This is actually to do with the fact that the drivers, they knew all of this going into the weekend, going into the race, and yet they weren't paying enough attention. They weren't essentially following the instructions they'd been given by the FIA and presumably then by their teams. So let's talk about that. Because I'll tell you what, my thoughts on all of this, and this will be controversial, there's a huge part of me that agrees with Michael Massey. Yes, of course, the position of the control line played a role. Of course, the fact the safety car lights went out may well have played a role too. The fact that it was an uphill gradient at the point that the collision happened may also have played a part in all of this. But ultimately, this is the sequence of events that happens over a race weekend. They arrive at a circuit. Michael Massey issues his race director's event notes. I talked about this last week, where he sends out detailed maps, detailed instructions for every procedure that will happen over the race weekend. He highlighted the fact that the start-finish straight was, and I've got a picture here, let's show you that one, that the finish line was a long way up the start-finish straight. You can see it there, around halfway along that straight. The checkered flag, that is the finish line, or the control line, as the FIA refer to it. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment. He told them all of that, and then what happens is on Thursday afternoon, the team managers all go in for a team managers meeting where they discuss all of the event notes that the race director has sent out normally the day before. So he, in that meeting, highlights the fact that at this particular circuit, there's a slight anomaly in that the control line is a long way down the start-finish straight. And everybody knows that because of that, there's going to be this situation where, particularly on a long straight like that, whoever's leading the pack is not going to want to break free any earlier than they have to, because otherwise you open yourself up to losing out to a massive slipstream, particularly with these cars along that really long straight. The team managers then go back to their garages, they brief the team, they go through all of these scenarios with the drivers. Sunday morning again, they will reiterate the restart procedure after a safety car, particularly at Mercedes, where Valtteri Bottas, of course, would be most likely, him or Lewis would be most likely at the front of all of this. All of that should have been well known by the drivers. They should have been well aware of it. They should have been no surprises. I tell you what else would have happened. Every single driver on that grid, I almost guarantee, will have been watching the F2 race and the F3 race on Sunday morning and Saturday afternoons, because they have not raced. F1 have not raced at this track before. So watching races in Formula cars gives them a huge amount of information. And in the F3 race, there was a very similar scenario. There was a safety car restart. It played out exactly the same in that the lead car went very slowly all the way down to the control line, and all of the drivers managed to negotiate that and navigate that without a problem. So given all of that, we then fall back to the drivers. What should or could the drivers have been done could have done differently? And what I want to show you is, have I got a picture? Maybe, oh yes I have, yeah. This picture here. This is a picture, it's obviously terrible resolution, but this is a picture, it's a screen grab of the restart. Now, the incident was essentially triggered by that gap you can see there between Ocon and Russell. Russell saw the huge gap forming between himself and Ocon. He had to close that gap up, so Russell slams on the accelerator to try and launch forward to close the gap to Ocon, because he can't risk, first of all, he can't risk dropping too far back, because then he falls foul of a penalty within the regulations, but equally, he doesn't want to be too far behind Ocon when they actually get to the control line and are able to overtake. So Russell launches forward. He then gets up to the back of Ocon, of course, where the cars are going very slowly, and he has to now back off. He's within his 10 car lengths. He slows up behind Ocon. Everybody behind George Russell seemingly has forgotten the fact that we cannot go racing until we get to that control line, which is way up the straight, and has just got their head down in the slipstream thinking we are racing again. And you can understand why that happens, because a driver ultimately is only thinking about one thing, which is to try and get an advantage wherever he can. But ultimately, they know what's happening here. They know, where the control line is. It's a long way down the straight. So I can see Cosmos 2017 saying, go when the green flag comes out. I mean, the green flags come out when the safety car pulls in and the race leader takes control of the race. But that doesn't mean, and all the drivers know this, it's just the rules. You can't go actual racing until you get to the control line. So this for me is a combination of the peculiarities of this circuit, but ultimately drivers either not knowing the rules or forgetting the rules, or the red mist coming down at the launch of a restart and those rules falling to the back of their mind. But ultimately, it's their mistake. They're in control of these cars. So the other point that I need to make, and that's why I want to go back to this before I come to you guys, and I'll come back to this map. Let's say that, there's the map of the circuit again. Let's say that the safety car lights hadn't gone out late or whatever else the drivers are complaining about. Any driver leading that pack in control of the race once the safety car has gone, whether the safety car lights went out half a lap earlier or half a lap later, would still do the same thing, because the only opportunity for the slipstream is once you get onto that start-finish straight. There's no point in a driver bolting 2 or 3 corners earlier, even if he can, and in this situation he couldn't because the safety car lights hadn't gone out, but even if he could, he wouldn't. He'd still do what Bottas did and cruise down the start-finish line straight to get to the control line and then launch from there. So let's hear your thoughts on this. I've got mixed feelings. I think, yes, the circuit played a part, of course, but everybody knew that going into the weekend. So then it falls to the drivers, and the drivers have to deal with the situation that's in front of them, the rules that they've got in front of them, the cars they've got. For me, you can't look too much beyond the drivers when it comes to this, in my mind. Let's see what you're saying here. Notice it was mainly the younger drivers at fault, says Cara Hart. Absolutely, agree with you there. That's a very good point. So Russell have the reason to accelerate, closing the gap, but the rest behind him are at fault for thinking the race had already started. Well, no, Russell shouldn't have fallen that far behind Ocon in the first place, is probably the first point, but he did. And that's maybe the fact that Ocon launched, so there's a concertina effect, obviously. But in any safety car restart, there is a concertina effect. The problem here was that it's on a long straight. Instead of all the weaving that happens around most circuits before you launch, everybody's just tucked in behind each other because they don't want to lose out on a potential slipstream if we do go. So no one can see past the car in front of them. So that's the other point here. But, you know, look at all the drivers that missed out. Let's take one to one side, the fact that people could have been seriously injured. They've all not finished the race, those guys. So stepping out of line a little bit to see what's going on in front, to see what opportunities might be opening up, to see what's happening ahead of you, feels like the sensible thing to me. Rasmus Lindberg, completely agree. If they knew and were briefed this might be the case, then it's on the drivers to avoid the situation. They absolutely were. The drivers briefing and the support races gave them all the info that they ignored in the race. Drivers' fault. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to do that. They all need to have a good chat in the drivers' meeting, Mark Mitson. Well, they will all have a good chat in the drivers' meeting, and I've no doubt when we get to Sochi, this will be very high up on the agenda, obviously. But the other part of Paul's question, just to finish off, can you think of a suitable solution? No. And I think the suitable solution here is that I actually don't think it would ever happen again. I think if we went back to that circuit tomorrow and had a similar situation, those inexperienced drivers down the back that essentially were the ones that caused this now have that experience. And I feel like there's no way they'd do that again, knowing that that's the potential outcome. So for me, you always get this concertina effect. You always get people spinning tyres and gaps opening and closing leading up to the launch of a restart. It's just that on this occasion, it happened to be on a straight, and therefore nobody was kind of weaving out of position. Nobody was looking further around, getting views past the cars in front like you would do if you're on a corner. But drivers have to appreciate that. They know that. They were warned of it. They didn't take it into consideration, is my opinion on that. And I'm not a driver, so the drivers, I'm sure, have a very different view. But that would be my view. They need good spotters like in Indycar. Yeah, I'm not sure. Brake lights. If it was not a safety car, Ricciardo would have got a podium and Cyril would have got a tattoo. Yes, he would. Drivers need to not accelerate and brake aggressively during a safety car period, never mind anywhere near the start. That is very true, and that is also within the regulations. So you're not allowed to aggressively start and stop once you get into that phase where the safety car has pulled out. So in that sense, that's kind of what Russell was doing. It may have been what Ocon was doing, I'm not sure, but Russell had that huge gap open up and had to therefore launch forward and then jump on the brakes to close the gap. So, you know, they've all been into the steward's office, they've decided nobody was predominantly at fault, but they've all had a warning, is the outcome. So that's my opinions on it. Anthony Falconer, the drivers are professionals, they should know what to do. Yes, absolutely. Time to choose says, I disagree with Marc here. That's absolutely fine. The best solution is teams to say to the driver when the leader starts. Well, they have all that option. They can talk to the drivers, of course, and tell them. Jacques Villeneuve was one of those famously who always had an open radio to his engineer. And even I used to be amazed at the start of a race, his engineer, Jock Clear, would be talking him through the start opening corners, saying, right, go left, go right, go left, you know, and I was amazed that, first of all, a driver wanted that and could react to that, and that it was deemed to be the best way forward, but that's the way he used to do it. So that is an option open to them as well. Could they have a set speed under the safety car? Well, I mean, they kind of do to a certain extent. I mean, under the safety car, yes, but once Valtteri Bottas had taken control of that race, so he effectively becomes the safety car, it's then up to him. He could have gone way before, he could have gone at turn 15. I know it says turn 14 on that map, but actually it's turn 15. He could have gone there. That's where the safety car lights went out, which is late, but he was never going to go there. He was never go, even if the lights had gone out around turn 12 or 13, he wouldn't have gone early for the reasons I said earlier. Right, I think we've probably at least covered that one off a little bit for now. Let me have a look at the next question, because it's all around safety cars and those restarts. I want to talk about this one from Gianni Contio, who says, the safety car turned off the lights at the last corner. Do they have a selected place for every track, and why wait that late? And this is another point that Michael Massey has addressed in his comments, and again, I agree with him on this one. A lot of the drivers said this happened because the safety car turned its lights off so late that Valtteri had no choice but to work his way all the way down to the control line before putting his foot down. I mean, I honestly disagree with that, and I know I'm not a racing driver. I have to respect their opinion on that, but it just makes no sense, because even if you went early, you're still opening yourself up to a massive slipstream for the guy behind. So, in answer to your question, Yanni, the answer to that is yes. Michael Massey says, rightly so, that at this particular circuit, the lights went out at that point because the distance between the lights going out on the safety car and the control line, which normally, of course, the finish line is pretty soon out of the final corner. And so the safety car lights go out a few corners earlier than that, way earlier, in fact, normally. Here, there was a long distance, in terms of meters, a long way from the last corner and the point where the safety car lights went out to the control line. That's fair enough. It's just a feature of this particular circuit. But as I say, if they'd switched the lights off earlier, it would have still had the same outcome, in my opinion. One of the reasons they switched the lights off later, and Lewis said this, they're switching the lights off later this year than they have in the past, is to try and help the show. So it's a little bit Hollywood, a little bit like these red flags that may be a bit dubious at times, a safety car when maybe a VSC might have done. It's to try and spice up the show, because Formula One is very aware that with Mercedes being so dominant, that if they switch the safety car lights off, say on a more normal circuit, half a lap earlier, Valtteri Bottas or Lewis Hamilton just disappear into the distance and the race is kind of over. And they're trying to, rightly or wrongly, they're trying to spice up the show in this way. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because we've got a question on that around virtual safety cars and safety cars as well. Should Formula One or the FIA be trying to spice up the show by throwing a safety car or by dropping in a red flag when maybe in previous years that wouldn't have been the case? Let's see. Cover the first crash that killed Max's race. Yeah, I'll get to that one in a moment. Could the VSC actually disappear? It's been a long time since we had one, says XR Bukowski. The VSC, I mean, could it disappear? It could disappear. It came in, so it could as easily go again. I think it's a useful tool, and it does depend on the incident, but they seem to now have an opinion where if the field has strung out and if it's looking like the race is done, strategy's all over, it's a clear dominant victory for Mercedes, for example, a safety car brings it alive again. And the truth is it does do that. It does bring it alive. But should we be doing that? Is that Formula One? You know, it's a bit NASCAR, isn't it? And maybe it works in NASCAR. I don't know if I don't follow it enough. But it does have the right effect. But does it go against the ethos of what Formula One should be? Rather than having red flag over 10 or more, we could have had 10 or more laps behind the safety car. Oh, you'd rather have a red flag over 10 or more laps than behind the safety car. Okay, fair enough. I mean, some incidences, clearly they need a red flag. If there's debris everywhere, you need to have a red flag because you've got marshals all over the place. So there's absolutely a place for the red flag. There's absolutely a place for the safety car. Is there really a place for the virtual safety car? And yes, I think there probably is. Yes, more safety cars and red flags, Michael Chino. So there you go. Some people actually enjoy that because it does bring the race alive again. And if you're watching Formula One for an entertainment perspective, which I guess we are at least to some extent, that's what you want. If you're watching it as a fan, or if you're sitting in the garage or in the pit wall for one of the teams, it's the last thing you want because it feels like it's like the puppet masters are just tugging the strings, trying to make the race entertaining when you as a team are doing all you can to build a healthy lead, maybe use up your tyres or whatever, and it feels wrong. So there we go. On that same subject, so while you're popping in questions on that one, I want to talk about this because Red Panda says, was it possible to deploy the VSC instead of a regular safety car after the lap 1 incident? Maybe this would have helped to avoid the carnage at the restarts. And why has the VSC been used so scarcely this season? Well, that's why it's been used so scarcely this season. And that lap 1 incident probably could have had a virtual safety car. Having said that, there were 2 or 3 cars stricken, I think, in the gravel at the time. There was gravel all over the circuit. So for me, a safety car was the right call on that particular incident, the lap 1 incident. We've got a field of cars that are very bunched up because it's just been the start, and there's a lot of marshals having to get onto the circuit to sweep gravel away and clear cars away with machinery trying to lift Max's car out too. So for me, that incident was the right call to make a safety car. But the reason we don't see VSCs very much is pretty much for those things I've said, because a safety car in some incidences really helps to spice up the show. I'm not saying that's what happened in the lap 1 incident though. Wastes too many laps in my opinion. Any thoughts about racing? If people stop watching, we lose our F1, absolutely. So entertainment shouldn't interfere with competition, says Paul Collin. This is a really delicate balance between entertainment and competition. It's something that I feel like Formula E has gone too much to the side of entertainment, yet it is very entertaining, and I know Formula E splits people down the middle. I love the racing. It is very, very entertaining racing. It's not the purest of racing. It's not old school. It's not traditional, but it's entertaining. Formula One is a bit more the other way, but it's starting to swing towards that. So somewhere there has to be a balance. And as somebody just pointed out there, we need people to watch this sport, because if they don't, well, the whole thing falls apart. Sponsors don't put money into it. TV companies don't put money in. Ultimately, manufacturers and backers and engine manufacturers, they all start to pull out. So we need people watching, and if we want people to watch, it has to be entertaining and interesting. But there are a number of ways we can do that. Hopefully 2022 and the new cars might be some way to work towards that. Right. Who do you think was at fault for the first crash? That one, I think probably Gasly. I don't think I've seen enough onboards, but from what I saw, it looked like Gasly got a little bit out of shape, clipped Kimi, I think, and then Kimi ran into the back of Max. I think I've got that right, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was probably Gasly. What else? Hold on. Albon was hit on the hands by debris from Stroll's car going off. Is it time to bring in the safety screen like Indycar? That's a good point. I think that's one of the areas where that aero screen that they're running in Indycar at the moment clearly has an advantage in that it stops small things coming through. But I don't know. What we don't know yet is, are there enough disadvantages to say the Halo's better in terms of maybe getting a driver out of the car, in terms of visibility in poor conditions or when there's oil on the screen. in terms of overheating. I know that's an issue, should be an easy one to fix, but I think that's definitely something that's going to be looked into by Formula One. I'm sure they're looking into it already. And if they deem the aero screen to be safer and with no downsides over a halo, I'm sure we'll have it at some point. Right. Gasly went for a gap. Yeah, he did go for a gap. I mean, yeah, it's first lap. These incidents just happen, so I'm not going to put too much blame on anybody. That happens quite often on the first lap. And it's a narrow circuit. I mean, did you see the images of the cars on the opening lap? So many cars around turn 1, maybe 3, 4 abreast, which I kind of like. Yes, you could say it's too narrow for modern Formula One, and some of these incidents are a result of that, but isn't that okay? Isn't that the drivers have to then deal with that? You know, you give them a challenge, they have to deal with it. They're 20 best drivers in the world, aren't they? So I'm not against that. I think a narrow circuit every now and again, that's okay, as long as you can find ways to get past. Right, let's move to, this one here. With safety car restarts, aren't allowed to pass. You aren't allowed to pass from the first safety car line, in this case before the pit entry. So why was everyone waiting behind Bottas before the crash rather than gunning it? Okay, so that question there refers to, let me show you that map again, refers to the rules used to say, and that's the key point here, used to say that the safety car line, which was just before the pit entry at this circuit here, that's when you used to be able to start racing again. A couple of years ago, they changed that to the control line. That's the finish line at almost every circuit. In fact, I think at every circuit it is. The control line is the finish line. But of course, the finish line at most circuits is way further down the straight, much closer to the exit, the final corner. And so that's what they changed the rule to, because the final safety car line was often in a corner on some circuits, which made it pretty tricky and potentially dangerous for cars going for it when they're coming out of a corner. So by allowing them to exit the corner, then cross the control line and go racing, that was deemed to be the safer way to do it. So it used to be the case like that. Now, no longer. It's just that on this particular circuit, the control line, it was way, way further up the straight. Right, that's that one covered off. Oh, this one, Mugello runoff areas, from Olaf Stormstrom. It says, Mugello is a beautiful track and all, but it seems to punish incidents very harshly. Are the runoff areas too unforgiving and the recovery facilities too poor for modern F1? I'm going to say no. I think that the runoff areas are punishing, absolutely, and I loved that about it. I don't think it's too punishing at all. I think, if you step over those lines, you should be punished. And we can get into track limits, because the track limits for me were a bit ridiculous at this particular circuit. And if you just switch the telly on as a Formula One casual, you'll have seen drivers way, way, way off the circuit using the gravel trap as the limit. Now, the gravel trap should be a real limitation, but what happened here was the FIA issued their race notes saying that they're not going to police track limits in the normal way because the gravel trap could do that for them. The reason they're doing that is, first of all, it's easy for the FIA because they don't have to go through the process of penalising multiple people over the course of a race weekend, installing timing loops or trackside cameras to monitor those track limits. So it's much, much easier. But the regulations, it's a regulation. The regulations state very clearly in black and white that the white line at the edge of the circuit denotes track limits. And a car, I think it even says in words to this effect, a car will deem to be outside of the track limits if all four wheels have gone beyond that white line at the edge of the racetrack. Well, that's a regulation, and yet we're just allowing it to disappear and people run as wide as they like. So mixed feelings about that. Loved the gravel traps, loved the fact that you got bitten if you went off. But I think we should be adhering to track limits. Surely it's in the regs. What do you think? You all want old school tracks and races, and now you're complaining about it. Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm not complaining at all. I loved the Mugello circuit. I loved the old school nature of it. I loved the gravel traps. Really, really like it. Let me see. A lot of cars drive over the white line. I saw a lot of cars drive over the white lines in Mugello. Exactly, Josh Smith. well over it because they were told they were allowed to. And that was an understandable decision in some sense, because you can imagine the workload for the FIA when they are having to police those track limits. You've seen the messages pop up on the TV all throughout practice, qualifying and the race, where drivers are having times deleted. Well, that's a person or a couple of people in race control that are constantly having to look at that, monitor that. They've also got to install a timing loop, which is easier at some circuits than others. So I get why they're saying it. They've got a natural deterrent in a gravel trap. It's just that it was so far off the actual track. So when we talk about sort of race circuit track records, lap records and things, yes, it's a lap record, but that's because drivers were going way off the track. Anyway, that's another story altogether. It's better to watch cars testing the gravel traps, etc. Staying inside the white line doesn't look great on TV. Yeah, I mean, I get all of that. I do get it. So I'm not going to moan about it. I do get it. Let's change it up a little bit from Mugello. Let's take that one off. Pick some of yours here. What's your take on Perez getting the boot, says Adam Elliott. And that's a good point. That was another big storyline of this weekend, wasn't it? Perez out, Sebastian Vettel in. Maybe not the biggest surprise in the world, because I think we all probably saw it coming from some way off. But yeah, it feels wrong to me. It feels wrong on a moral level, but it also, to me, feels like the wrong decision from a sporting level. And I don't think there's much in the difference in terms of performance levels between Sebastian Vettel and Sergio Perez. And I know that many of you will disagree with that. But the reason I'm saying that is the whole world has watched Sebastian Vettel over the last couple of seasons crack under pressure, spin off on his own on a number of occasions, go wheel to wheel and lose out almost every time. Now, is that somebody you want bringing into your team? And lots of that, I'm sure, can be attributed to the Ferrari environment and everything else. But, you know, that's what Sebastian has done for the last 2 years, maybe more. And yet they have probably spent a huge amount of money on bringing him in. I know there's a marketing aspect of having a 4-time world champ, but Sergio Perez knows that car inside out. He knows that team inside out. It seems to work well. What are you saying? But Seb knows how to win, says Calvin Chan. Well, he did. He hasn't won for a long, long time, has he? I get that he knows how to win, okay? I get that his experience is valuable. That's absolutely valuable. I understand that. But do you want somebody who's on the way down in their career, or do you want someone who's already up, maybe even on the way up further? If you look at these things on a graph, which is exactly what Formula One teams do, by the way, they have a little bit like a football club scouts out players and builds massive files of data on each driver that they might be interested in. Well, if you look at that data from Sebastian Vettel, all recent data must point to a negative outcome. So, look, that's my opinion on it. I know it's going to be controversial, but that's Dave Henrique says, I agree with you, but that's the Ferrari effect. And that's a good point. It may well be that with a breath of fresh air, with a new team, with a new challenge, with new status within that organisation, maybe he'll come alive again. And I really hope so, because I want to see Sebastian doing well. So I'm certainly not writing Sebastian off. I think Ferrari as an organisation can kill drivers, you know, get up and go. It can just destroy people, engineers and designers and people within the team as well. So absolutely, this could be Ferrari specific, and put him in a new environment, he could flourish. Quite controversial, Marc, says Varun Mishra. Yeah, I mean, it is controversial. I know that many people will disagree, but there you go. It was a PR thing for Aston. The stocks jumped 8%. Yeah, of course, the PR aspect is exactly, one of the obvious things to bring a 4-time world champion in when you're launching a brand in the sport. I get that side of it, absolutely. Let me see. Perez is another terrible pay driver. One down, now dump Stroll. Wow, I don't agree with that at all. I think Perez actually is a much underrated driver, if I'm honest. And actually, you speak to anybody in that Force India Racing Point team, they speak very, very highly of Sergio Perez. And this wasn't a decision, I'm almost 100% sure, that came from the engineering team at Racing Point. I'm sure this is a decision that's come from way higher up. from Lawrence, and I think if you ask anybody inside that team, they would have probably, they won't say it, but they would have loved to hang on to Sergio. I think he's a great driver. Should have been banned when he rammed Hamilton. Vettel, you're saying, yeah. Well, look, that's one of those incidents, isn't it, that we've seen a real negative from Sebastian. But look, like I say, let's hope he gets a new lease of life. We won't be talking about this one for very long, I'm sure. I hope Perez gets a decent drive, either in Formula One at Haas or Alpha, but perhaps even more likely at Indycar. See, Delta 9 there says Perez to Indycar. Yeah, baby. I think I saw Zach Brown already coming out saying, look, if he wants to come and drive for our IndyCar team, he's more than welcome. And that might not be a bad move for him, would it? That would be probably a very good move for him. So let's hope that this isn't the end for Checo and it's just a new beginning. Perez is guaranteed points, whereas Seb's all over the place. Andy Lowe. Perez at Williams would be great fit, I think, with the new investments. Yeah, Perez is a good driver, although Williams are already locked out, aren't they, I think? Mind you, so we're Racing Point a couple of weeks ago. What's your take on the next seat for Perez? I think it's most likely to be Haas. Is probably his most likely seat in Formula One. Beyond that, I think probably to IndyCar is my thoughts. Let me see. What do you think the Racing Point will have a rear end Vettel? Do you think the Racing Point will have a rear end that Vettel can work with? Don't know on that one. I mean, there's only one way to find out once he gets in it. We don't know. We know the car is going to be pretty much what they've got this year, don't we? Moving forward, certainly into next year. 2022, of course, which is really what it's all about, is everything changes anyway. So actually, they're all going to be starting from scratch in 22. So we'll have to see. He may well come alive. And the other thing is that, look, Sebastian Vettel was very, very good in that Red Bull that had a huge amount of underfloor aerodynamics, didn't it? With the high rake, with the diffuser, blown diffuser. It was a very unique type of, not very unique, a unique type of car to drive. But the aero, or a huge chunk of the aero, came from the underside of the car, more so than most other cars. And of course, that's what we're moving back to in 2022. So it may well be that some of these characteristics swing back towards somebody like Sebastian. We'll have to wait and see. What is your take in all the teams dropping the Racing Point brake duct appeal from Laz? I think it's perhaps unsurprising to some extent. You know, I think there's obviously been some conversations behind the scenes. Most surprising is obviously Racing Point dropping their appeal, because they all the way through were adamant they hadn't done anything wrong and they wanted to clear their name. The others, you could say, well, they got what they wanted because the FIA have already come out and said we're going to write new regulations to ban copying in that way from next year. So they kind of got what they want. But Racing Point, well, they didn't really get what they wanted, did they? They still got this penalty over them which says that they essentially broke the rules. So they didn't clear their name. I think this is a bigger story behind the scenes where the FIA or F1 have got everybody together, which happens a lot, and said, listen, we all need to we all need to think about the bigger picture here. What's best for Formula One? We don't want this ridiculous thing hanging over us for the next few months because it doesn't look good on the sport. So look, let's move forward. Let's find a way to do it. And I'm sure, I don't know how they've managed to move things forward in the way they have, but clearly everybody's been told to think about the bigger picture rather than the way they were doing it. Toto sorted the whole mess out, says John Stout. Super Toto to the rescue. I think it was becoming slightly uncomfortable for Toto, wasn't it, for a while. Do you think Haas will have all new drivers next season? Kay Nelson. That's an interesting one. I definitely think that Romain Grosjean is on his way out. I actually even think Roman knows that. If you read into the comments he's made, I think he's already leaning towards him leaving the sport. And I think he's ready to do that. I think he's had a good run. He's had a longer run than many people thought he would if you go way back in his career. I think Kevin Magnussen, for me, and I've said this before, still has a lot to offer. Formula One, I still think he's a great driver. But if they've got the likes of Hülkenberg on the market, if they've got Perez on the market, you know, you could see a Hülkenberg-Perez lineup probably being more attractive than a Romain Grosjean and a Kevin Magnussen lineup. So may well be that we see two new drivers in that car. Thoughts on Lewis being investigated by the FIA? I'm not going to go into that because I think this is about a rules breach. It's not a political. It's not anybody casting aspersions on Lewis's politics or his statement he was making. If there's an investigation by the FIA, it's about breaching the FIA regulations. And if he's done that, it's not a judgment call. If he's breached a regulation, then they have to punish him. So we'll see what happens with that one. Let me see. Ineos buying Marc. Okay, so free to wheel. There's lots of rumours, weren't there, about Ineos, the sponsor at Mercedes, taking a larger stake in the organisation, maybe even to the point where they become majority stakeholder and rename the team Ineos F1 or something like that. Now, when I saw that, and it was just a story that popped up on the internet with no real backing at that stage, Toto, I think, actually has come out today and said it's just not true. On that subject, if it had been true, if there is something in that, you can start to link that with Lewis's delay of signing a contract, because Ineos, if you don't know who they are, they're a kind of petrochemical company that are notoriously unenvironmentally friendly. They have got a very checkered history in terms of being bad for the environment, in terms of trying to get around EU environmental legislation. They're trying to do that right now. And, with the path that Lewis is on right now, I could see that he would not be happy about that. So there may be something in that they are trying to increase their presence, and Lewis may have some say in that, or at least may be having a part of that discussion. I'm speculating massively, but you can start to link the two, of course. But Toto today says Ineos are not buying the team. They're not changing the name. So if that's true, I think that story's possibly dead in the water. Will Lewis stay without Toto? Well, I think more and more that Toto is going to step down as being team principal at the end of this year. I don't think he's going to leave Mercedes. I think he's still got his shareholding. He owns 30% of the team. I think he'll stay, but I don't think he'll stay in that particular role. The more and more I think about it, the more I hear things from people and talk to people, that's the conclusion I'm coming to. Will Lewis stay? Yeah, I think he will. Lewis can't afford to leave, can he? Because he's on the brink of creating a history in this sport that probably will never be repeated. And that could be obviously a 7th world title this year, probably an 8th world title next year. And he's only going to do that with Mercedes in reality, isn't he? So I think so. I think he will stay. I think Toto will stay, just in a different capacity. Let me see. McLaren. All right, yeah, we got a question on the McLaren Technology Centre. Here it is. Free to Wheel again says, is it true the McLaren Tech Centre is up for sale and Marc is about to be sold to Ineos? If it is true about Marc, could this be why Lewis is delaying signing a new contract with him? Sorry, I've jumped the gun there. So having dealt with the Marc and Ineos side, let's talk about McLaren. So you may have seen that I retweeted a tweet last week about McLaren's MTC, their home, the McLaren Technology Centre, being up for sale. And it is. They are looking for a buyer, but it's not to move out. It's not for McLaren to move out of that amazing facility. They're looking for a buyer who will buy the freehold of the place, of the site, and then lease it back to McLaren on a monthly lease. And it's a relatively common financial play in big business to free up cash. The downside, or the sad, the reason I tweeted it, I said it made me sad, and the reason it makes me sad is that it makes me sad that McLaren are in this situation that they have to do that. Ron, when I was there, Ron was so proud when we moved into that place, because I think within something like 18 months, they'd cleared the entire debt that they had borrowed to build it. It was an incredible achievement and something that Ron was so proud of. Dennis Weiss, as I sent that tweet to you. Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it. Ron was so passionate and proud about that project and that building, and rightly so, because it's still, to this day, an incredible place. The best facility in Formula One by a million miles. It's just beautiful in so many ways. I can't see that Ron would have, and things change, but I can't see that Ron would have let the organisation get to the point where they have to start, freeing up cash from the building that he put so much into building. And this is a sad situation that McLaren are in, because if you remember last year, they tried to mortgage a lot of the heritage cars, some of those world famous historic Formula One cars from the likes of Senna and co that are there, kept in storage at McLaren. They tried to free up cash by mortgaging those, and were only prevented in doing so by some of the bondholders from the organisation. So McLaren's financial situation, not just the F1 team, but as a group, not in the best of health. And of course, 2020 will not have done that any favours. So it's a real shame that they're in that situation. I hope they manage to turn it around. Obviously, things on track are going in the right direction. They've got massive loan or investment loan from another Bahraini bank, haven't they, which is all linked to the original Bahraini owners. So essentially the owners have put more money into the organisation to free up, to keep the cash flow moving. But, you know, it's tough times. It's tough times in the world right now. Certainly tough times in Formula One, and McLaren are really feeling it. So I hope they turn it around. Let me see. Is the issue the road car side of the business? Well, the road car side is definitely struggling. I think has been struggling for some time. And of course, with the pandemic, no one's buying very expensive supercars. But equally, the Formula One team is in the same boat. You know, they've got a massive lull in prize money coming in. Sponsors will have had to be paid back. They don't have the same TV revenue coming in. So everything is reduced. From here and moving right forward through into 2021 for Formula One teams. So it's the entire organisation that suffered in truth, but it wasn't in the best of health before that. It's all part of the Ferrari master plan to get rid of those pesky garagistas. Right, is there anything known regarding the power unit that Aston Martin F1 will be using next year? It'll be the Mercedes that they use, that Racing Point used this year, so no change in that one. Let me see. Valtteri Bottas. Somebody talking about Valtteri. I want to talk quickly about Valtteri because we've got a question from Monster Matt who says, even though Bottas didn't win, I was happy to see him demand different tyres and strategy from the team. I hesitate to say that he's turned a corner, but at least he demonstrated something. Your thoughts on that? Well, I agree with you, Matt. I think it was really nice to see him being demanding on the radio, being adamant, listen, do not put me on the same strategy as Lewis. I want to go the opposite of him because that's going to give me a chance. I'm fed up of just doing the same. And he was very adamant, wasn't he? He was very angry about it. And I'm really pleased. We need to see that, but we need to see a lot more of it. And it's all very well doing that side of things on the radio, but he's also got to show that same level of determination and aggression on the racetrack. I mean, I thought he had a decent weekend this weekend. He was actually ahead of Lewis, wasn't he, throughout practice and most of qualifying. But when it really mattered, he couldn't get it done. And actually, it was only that final restart that really let him down and ultimately lost him the race. So I thought it was a better weekend for Bottas. I just want to see it continue and build on that. You know, in reality, I think it's a bit late now. The championship for me is Lewis's, not in terms of numbers, it still could easily fall apart, but I think in terms of mentally, psychologically, Lewis is just a step above Valtteri, and he's so dejected at the end of every race when he's being interviewed in the P2 position, and it must be demoralising, but it's happening week in, week out, and eventually that will get to you. Let me see. Lewis will leave after equaling Schumacher and will go to X44. I think he may well leave. He's talking about signing a 3-year deal, isn't he? So that'll be next year, 2022, and then 23 probably. So I think he'll definitely want to experience the new cars and new regulations. And then I think after that contract expires, that I imagine will be it for him. And he's got plenty of other things that he can go and do. So he won't be kicking around. He's got plenty to keep him busy. McLaren versus Aston Martin next year. Your thoughts? Both having a Merc engine in the back. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be a really close battle, a really interesting battle actually. I think McLaren, like I touched on last week, have got this slight issue of trying to shoehorn a Mercedes power unit into the back of a chassis that wasn't designed for it. And with the regs now frozen, they can't do a huge amount to adapt for that. They're having to spend all of their tokens on fitting that in, so they can't then spend those tokens on performance enhancement, whereas others like Racing Point can absolutely do that. So McLaren, might have a tough season next year, but they're looking longer term. This is a deal for a number of years. McLaren with a Mercedes car power unit for 2022 and beyond, well, that could be a different story altogether. Which Ferrari young driver will be promoted from F2? That's a really good question. I hold my hands up. I honestly have no idea. There's still some races to go in F2. Schumacher, of course, had a very good weekend and is looking like, he could, if he comes through and wins the title, it's going to be very difficult not to step him up to the Alpha, isn't it? The story's too good. If he's got the super license and the experience of winning a championship behind him in F2, you'd say that he's got to be the next one in line. But, that championship is still very much wide open. How do Mercedes like having Williams at the back of the grid? Well, I'm sure they'd much prefer them to be further up the grid, obviously. But the situation at Williams hopefully is going to start to turn around. We've got new investment. We don't know to what level they're going to plough money into the organisation, but going into a new phase of Formula One where it's much less about budget and much more about experience, resource that you have there, the way you spend it. It's going to start to come back at least some way towards the likes of Williams and the Racing Points and the Haas teams that don't spend the 350 million that the top teams do. So Williams could well start making their way back up the grid with that Mercedes power plant before too long. Right, a couple of minutes left. Let me just see. A couple more questions. Hold on. Ocon brakes. Understeer podcast says, do you know why Ocon couldn't run with his brakes? I do. They overheated, essentially. They caught fire, which actually is not that unusual, catching fire on the brakes, believe it or not, particularly in pit stops. I've been sat there on many occasions when the car has rolled in for a pit stop. You take the wheel off and there are just flames licking around the brake disc and caliper where the bits of rubber drop on, little marbles of rubber drop onto the red hot disc and just burst into flames. So not that unusual. That is not Ocon's car, as you can see, but that's just a picture of a brake on fire because it's the only one I could find. That's what happened to Ocon's car. His brakes caught fire, and when they caught fire under that safety car period, they essentially burnt too much stuff. So the carbon fibre starts to melt if that fire doesn't go out. Fires are okay as long as you're at racing, if you're in a pit stop, because you quickly get back to racing speed and they go out. If it's for a prolonged period like that was, it starts to burn things like brake lines, things like carbon fibre wishbones. And at that point, you can't guarantee the integrity of those components any longer. And that's what happened. So when they got the red flag, for example, they just couldn't repair that much damage to the back of the car in time, and they had to retire him. So a real shame for him because, surprisingly, Renault were a lot better than expected. Daniel Ricciardo, this close to a podium. How good would that have been? Now, what are you saying on this? Lewis's brakes were smoking on the grid on the restart, but he still aced it. Yeah, absolutely. So, as I say, not unusual for bits of rubber to drop onto a brake disc and get a lot of smoke. Eventually that can turn into flames. But as long as you get moving again and you get the airflow coming through, the fire's extinguished and the temperatures settle down. So 5 to beer o'clock, says Neil Roberts. Thanks, mate. God, it's really hot in this room tonight. Right, final question then, as we've got a couple of minutes. Let's go with this one. Kimi's pit stop from Drunk Again Curtis. Wow, Kimi had a tough pit stop. What happened? Essentially, it was down to the pit stop light system having a malfunction. So the guys on the rear, they had a slightly slow pit stop anyway, but they changed the rear tyres. What happens is when the rear gunner zips the nut on, when he gets the little light on his gun to say that that there's got enough torque on the wheel nut, that it's done up, he pushes a button to illuminate a light on the light system, and that says that that wheel nut is done up and ready to go. Well, that didn't happen. So you get a light from all four corners. On some, that automatically drops the jacks. And what it also does is, of course, trigger the green light at the front of the car to release it. Well, somewhere in that system, there was a failure and that didn't happen. So either it was a simple fact of the guy on the wheel gun didn't push his button. I think that's unlikely. Much more likely there was a system failure that didn't trigger the green light at the front of the car. So Kimi was still sat there with a red light on, waiting for someone to tell him to go. So that's essentially what happened there. But it did cost them a huge amount of time and looked pretty comical in the end. Right, we're there, 10 o'clock. Thank you so much, guys. I am definitely going to get a drink because it is hot. Yes, Laz, beer o'clock. It absolutely is, and I need one tonight. Thank you again for all your questions, all your input. I really appreciate it. I've got some cool stuff this week. I've got, as you can see, got the old race seat out because I've got a whole new set of gear. You may have seen this on my Instagram. I've got some amazing new sim racing gear, which I haven't yet installed. I'm doing it tomorrow. So that's why that's out. And there's a video, of course, to come with that, which you'll see over the next few days. So I'm looking forward to that one. Keep an eye out if you're into your sim stuff. I'll be back with other stuff over the course of the week. Probably Tales from the Treehouse on Friday. Thank you. Have a great week. I'll see you soon. Ta-ra, folks.